Okay, hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm Coach Kyle, and today we're talking about the Bullseye technique or method so that your kids can stay in the optimal learning zone so that they learn skills faster. My name is Kyle Thalman, aka Coach Kyle. I'm an engineer, a coach, a gymnast, and a philosophizer. I invented the wizard coaching method because it works like magic. Like and subscribe this channel and share it with friends if you find these videos helpful. Anyway, today's topic is about the Bullseye technique and more specifically the optimal learning zone. So back in like 1925, there was this crazy psychologist called Lev Vygotsky. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he's this interesting psychologist, and he was doing studies on the zone of learning. Like, you want to make sure that whatever they're learning isn't super easy, and it's not just too complex that they'll never get it. Okay, so there's this zone in between too easy and too hard that people learn the quickest. Now, he called this the zone of proximal development. I like to call it the optimal learning zone. It's just easier to say, but you get the idea. We want to find that range, that little range where kids, it's not too hard, but it's not too easy for the kids, and they're really going to progress the fastest. An interesting thing here is when kids are learning languages, like toddlers, adults will naturally speak to toddlers at just a little bit above where the toddler is actually capable at. Any adult around a toddler will naturally bring their sentence structure down. It goes from goo goo gaga to like, oh, you want door, open door, to like, hey, how was school? How are your friends? It just gets more and more complex as they develop. Another way to think of it is powerlifters. When they're trying to increase their maximum lifts, they don't work at something, way too easy. So if a powerlifter is like, he could do barely 500 pounds, like deadlifts, sets of 3. That's where he's going to be training at, 500 pounds, sets of 3. If he can only do like sets of 2, he might down the weight a little bit, but really he's working on the edge of his capabilities. If you told him to go over and do, 50 sets with 200 pounds, yeah, he might get a little bit stronger. It might increase his endurance a little bit, but it's not really going to give him the gains in strength that he's looking for on his max lift. The bullseye technique. So I kind of think of it like a bullseye for your skills. At first, you place the bullseye 10 feet away, and you're just trying to have them hit it. Okay, anywhere on the target. If you hit it, awesome, cool. Okay, once they can do that about 80% of the time, then you go, okay, now instead of like anywhere on the target, you have to hit inside the first ring. Okay, and you have to do that like 80% of the time. Once they can do that, or like 4 out of 5 times, they got it. Like the 5th time, it might go a little far, but it's not, they're not shooting to other people. Every time they sort of get it, you make it a little bit harder, okay? Eventually, 10 feet away, they're hitting bullseyes, 4 out of 5 times. Then you move the target back farther and start over. Okay, so basically you take what they can barely do and keep them right there the whole time. Let's take a cartwheel, for example. So maybe you've got somebody who's never done cartwheels before, and you're like, okay, stand here, put your hands on that panel mat, jump your legs over to the other side of the panel mat. If they land without falling over, awesome. You reward them, and you're like, yes, excellent job, very good. If not, you're like, okay, try it again. This time, try not to fall over, Don't bend your arms and let your face hit the mat. Whatever it is, tell them to fix it, and keep waiting until they get it, then reward them, and then they can move on. So like, yeah, you got it. Now move on. Now you have to start in a lunge with your arms up, nice 1 foot in front of the other, and then kick it over, land in a lunge, facing this way. Okay, if they land in the lunge, but it's not facing the right way, you're like, okay, close, but you got to land in the lunge facing this way. Once they get that, landing nicely lunge, perfect, then you go, awesome, cool, now we're going to make it tougher. Okay, we're going to take the panel out away, okay, and then you do it like on the line. Then you do it on the line with a perfect lunge, starting out. It's like arms up nice and tight. Then you kick over. And then you start with, arms up, lift your back leg first before your hands come down. Your hands are perfectly in the right position on the line. You kick it over to those perfect legs tight. You land completely balanced, no wobbles through the entire motion, landing perfectly the other way, head up, chin up, you tilt up the way you want it. You get extremely specific in each of these little steps. You make sure you only reward them and let them move on once they have it. This is how you train the kids to, I've seen like 6-year-olds with amazing form because they do a skill, they get it the first time and you're like, cool, awesome, you made it. And then the next time it's like, okay, you have to do this and get your arms straight. All right, now you made it. Cool. All right, now do this, get your arms straight, legs together. Now do this, get your eventually it's ridiculous. I mean, they've got perfect form, and instead of casting like barely off the bar, it's like cast handstand. Okay, this is how you make those small incremental changes to get those amazing routines in perfect form. Now, to use this, you're going to have to set up some sort of like progression for every single skill you teach. I know that sounds a little bit crazy. If you don't know what the steps are at square one through square 100, you're not going to be able to teach it, okay? That's like I said, if the jump is too great, okay? If it's like, okay, you jumped over, you landed on the other side, perfect. Now let's go to the high beam. It's not going to work, okay? You can't just go from, doing a cartwheel over here, barely making it on the floor, and then taking it to high beam. That's too much of a jump, and they're going to get discouraged, and it's going to take way longer to learn that skill. So you have to know every single step in between. Okay, we landed on the floor and didn't fall over, to we're doing a perfect cartwheel on the high beam. You know what I mean? And you really have to do that for almost every single skill you teach. So using this technique, I had kids that were like level 4 boys that were working level 5 and level 6 skills by the end of states, by the end of the season. States competition, this is as far as level 4s can go. But they were working level 4 and level 5 skills because I had the plan, and as soon as they had, once the kid has all the bonuses on the floor and they're all perfect and he's doing every routine with like 1, maybe 2/10 of deduction, it's going to get boring for him. So it's not difficult enough for him to keep, engaged and learning. He's going to start to fall back. Oh, and before somebody says something, I wasn't sandbagging the competition. These guys were level 4s because they were just too young to be level 5s. Okay, this was their first year competing level 4. It's not like I had, a 12-year-old level 4 that had been training forever and I'm just trying to have him win. Like, these guys were held back because of their age, and yet they were still working level 5, level 6 skills. So here's an example of how it would go. 1 month before our first competition, I'd have all the boys doing routines, basically. And it's like, okay, if you can make the level 4 routine, all of it with 1 point of deductions or less, then I'll let you work on a level 5 skill. Okay, then you could do back handsprings or standing back tucks, whatever it was. Then the next week, I'd be like, all right, we're doing routines again. You make a routine with 7/10 or less deductions, and then you can move on to working the big, funner skills. And, a couple kids would make, a couple kids wouldn't. But that's okay. The next week, it'd be like, all right, you got to make it within 4/10. And the week of the competition, they could only move up to the higher level skills if they had completed the routine with only 1/10 deduction. Don't make the mistake I did the first time I was doing this and move them up as a group. So if I had like 5 or 6 kids out of the 8 or 10 that I had, I would move the whole group up to working the upper level skills. That didn't work because the kids that weren't actually hitting the targets were, next week we'd go to 7/10, and there was no way because they didn't even make the 1/10 or 1 point deduction routine. You know what I mean? So I made it harder for them, but they still didn't make it. So some kids were actually progressing because I was staying in their optimal learning zone, but the kids that were, falling behind couldn't catch up because I had already made it too hard. So make sure when you're doing this, you go by an individual assessments. Okay, if one kid is just taking off, keep pushing him. Don't hold him back. But if another kid isn't making that jump, maybe you got to make more steps in that next jump. Give him smaller steps to complete it, so he stays engaged. He or she stays engaged and wanting to learn and wanting to get better. This technique is really nice when you're in competition season because if you've ever been through a competition where it's like, man, we've done millions of these routines and it's getting boring, they'll get better and better, and then they'll really start to taper off in their improvements because the routines are kind of too easy for them. And I found this to be extremely motivating because even if they're pretty good at routines, we're looking for that like almost perfection. It's like you can only have 1/10 of deductions in this routine to move on. Every skill, they are thinking, they're like, okay, did I get straight legs? Did I get pointed toes? They are looking for corrections. When you give them correction, you're like, you messed up here and here, and that's it. Fix those 2 things, and you're good. And they're laser focused on it, and it's awesome. I see huge improvements when you're like, all right, you're this close to moving on to something more fun, but you really got to focus on it. I've seen them work really, really hard to get those last final little corrections in their routines. Another way you can use this is more for a team building exercise where you go, okay, if everybody collectively as a group, we all do our routines and we only get 2 points off in deductions or whatever your criteria is. That way, everybody in the group has a vested interest in the other people doing well too. I found this really helpful for the kids that are, they always get it and they're moving up really quick to start yelling and helping out the other kids because they're like, hey, you need to do you need to get 5/10 or less on this last routine, or none of us can play dodgeball. So you can use that to be it's really team bonding because they're all pulling for each other because they all want to play dodgeball. How do you implement this into your coaching? Well, first of all, have a plan. Okay, figure out what skills you're teaching and break them down into as many pieces as you need. I think I actually wrote it out one time, and for the cartwheel, I had like 23, 24 different criteria that had to be right. The next thing is to get a notebook. Keep track of each kid's progress individually. I definitely couldn't keep, 30, 40 team kids all, in my brain exactly where they were. I'm like, okay, did he have, 7/10 last week, or was he on 4/10? I don't know. Use a notebook. It's really easy, but keep them on that range and be like, okay, you made it last week, or you didn't make it last week, so we're going to have the same goal. Or it's been 2 weeks in a row and you haven't made it, we're going to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so whatever it is, you got to be able to track that. So I like paper notebooks. I mean, if you're a phone guy, do that, but have some way to track your athlete's progress. Question of the day: you guys have any thoughts on this? I haven't heard anything like this, but what are you guys' thoughts? If you find this video helpful, please like it and subscribe to the channel. Share it on Facebook, share it on Instagram, share it on Twitter, wherever. Anyway, I'm Coach Kyle. Rock on.